What do they mean they can't treat my daughter? Shut the hospital down now.
Black baby denied treatment at the IC. Moments later her dad shuts down the hospital. A man stood alone in a sterile hospital corridor, his phone pressed against his ear, his voice cutting through the silence like ice. "Close it down," he said, each word deliberate and final. "Every department. Effective immediately." His face showed no emotion, but his eyes burned with something far deeper than anger. This wasn't just a command. This was justice. But to understand how we got here, we need to rewind 6 hours earlier, to a moment when everything changed for one father and his family. Welcome to Living Black Stories. Here we share powerful and inspiring tales of resilience, strength and triumph. If you love stories that empowers and motivates you, please join us. Don't forget to subscribe, hit the notifications bell, and tell us where you are watching from in the comments. 6 hours before that phone call, Marcus Chen was living every parent's dream. The 38-year-old software engineer had just finished celebrating his daughter's 4th birthday party, and the car still smelled like cake and balloons. In the passenger seat, his wife Janelle, a brilliant pediatric surgeon at Memorial Hospital across town, scrolled through photos on her phone, smiling at the joy captured in each frame. Their daughter Zoe sat in the back seat, exhausted from the celebration, her tiny braids adorned with pink and purple butterfly clips that she'd insisted on wearing. Her princess dress, still covered in frosting from where she'd gotten a little too enthusiastic with the cake, rustled as she shifted. Clutched in her small arms was her favorite stuffed giraffe, the one she'd named Mr. Spots and refused to sleep without. Marcus glanced in the rearview mirror, his heart swelling with that particular brand of love that only a parent understands. "You have fun today, princess?" he called back. But there was no response. "Zoe?" he tried again, his tone shifting slightly. Janelle looked back and what she saw made her blood run cold. "Marcus, pull over. Now." Her voice had transformed from casual to clinical in an instant, and Marcus knew better than to question that tone. He swerved to the shoulder, hazard lights flashing as Janelle unbuckled and climbed into the back seat. Zoe's eyes were half closed, her breathing rapid and shallow. When Janelle pressed her hand against her daughter's forehead, she jerked it back. The child was burning up. "She's on fire, Marcus. This isn't normal. Her breathing, look at her chest, she's working too hard." Janelle's medical training kicked in even as panic threatened to overwhelm her. She placed 2 fingers on Zoe's wrist, counting the racing pulse, watching the slight blue tinge forming around her daughter's lips. Marcus's hands shook as he pulled out his phone, already dialing 911, but Janelle stopped him. "No, we're 10 minutes from Riverside General. By the time an ambulance gets here and back we could already be there. Fast." Marcus didn't need to be told twice. The engine roared as he pulled back onto the road, his casual drive home transforming into a desperate race against time. Every red light felt like an eternity. Every car in front of them an obstacle between his daughter and help. Janelle kept talking to Zoe, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. "Baby, stay with mommy. Keep your eyes open, sweetheart. We're almost there." But Zoe's responses were becoming weaker, her little body going more limp with each passing minute. Marcus watched this unfold in the rearview mirror, his foot pressing harder on the accelerator. Traffic laws, speed limits, stop signs, none of it mattered. His daughter needed help and she needed it now. The emergency room entrance of Riverside General Hospital came into view, its bright red letters almost mocking in their cheerfulness. Marcus barely put the car in park before he was out, wrenching open the back door and scooping Zoe into his arms. Her body felt simultaneously too hot and too fragile, her princess dress flowing around her as he ran. Mr. Spots, the stuffed giraffe, fell onto the pavement, but there was no time to retrieve it. Janelle grabbed it as she ran behind him, her medical bag bouncing against her hip. The automatic doors of the emergency room slid open, and Marcus's voice echoed through the waiting area. "My daughter needs help. She can't breathe." A nurse at the intake desk, Linda, a woman in her 50s with tired eyes and efficient movements born from decades of emergency room chaos, looked up and immediately pressed a button. Within seconds a gurney appeared and Marcus laid Zoe down, his hands reluctant to leave her even as medical staff swarmed around them. Linda moved with practiced precision, wrapping a blood pressure cuff around Zoe's tiny arm, clipping a pulse oximeter to her finger, pressing a thermometer against her temple. The numbers that appeared made her pause. Temperature 104.8. Oxygen saturation 87 and dropping. Respiratory rate 42. She called out these vitals to a young doctor who'd appeared, Dr. Patel, a resident with kind eyes but a serious expression. Dr. Patel listened to Zoe's lungs, his stethoscope moving across her small chest as he frowned. Decreased breath sounds on the right side, crackles throughout. How long has she been sick? Janelle, forcing herself into doctor mode even though every instinct screamed at her to just be a mother, answered clearly. She was fine this morning. Perfectly healthy. This came on in the last hour, maybe less. Dr. Patel nodded, his mind already working through differentials. I'm thinking severe pneumonia, possibly progressing to sepsis. We need chest x-rays, blood cultures, and she needs ICU admission. Now. Linda nodded and turned to her computer to begin the intake process. I'll need your insurance information. Marcus, his eyes never leaving Zoe, pulled out his wallet and handed over their insurance card. Linda scanned it and something shifted in her expression. Her efficiency slowed just a fraction. She looked at the card more carefully, then at Marcus and Janelle, then back at the card. The insurance was through Chen Technologies, a name that didn't ring any bells for her. It looked like a small company policy, maybe a startup. Her fingers hesitated over the keyboard. Is there a problem? Janelle asked, noticing the change immediately. Linda's professional smile was back in place, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. No problem. Just processing everything. But the way she flagged something on the screen, the way she glanced toward the administrative offices, told a different story. Dr. Patel, focused on Zoe, didn't notice the shift. He ordered 4 fluids, antibiotics, oxygen support. Get respiratory therapy down here, and let the ICU know we have an incoming admission. 4-year-old female, severe respiratory distress. Marcus stood beside the gurney, holding Zoe's hand, whispering to her that everything would be okay, that Daddy was here, that she was safe. But as he watched the nurses work, as he saw Linda making phone calls with a concerned expression, as he noticed the way she kept glancing at that insurance card, a cold feeling began to settle in his stomach. Something wasn't right. And in a hospital, when something isn't right, minutes can mean the difference between life and death. Janelle, her medical instincts sharp even through her fear, also noticed. She'd worked in emergency rooms long enough to recognize the patterns, the unspoken communications between staff, the way bureaucracy sometimes moved slower than medicine demanded. She stepped closer to Linda. How long until she can go up to the ICU? Linda didn't meet her eyes. The ICU coordinator is reviewing the case. Should hear back soon. Should hear back soon. For words that would haunt them for the next several hours. For words that meant waiting while their daughter struggled to breathe. For words that signaled the beginning of a nightmare that no parent should ever have to face. Because in that moment, as Zoe lay fighting for every breath, with her oxygen levels dropping and her temperature spiking, someone in this hospital was deciding whether she deserved immediate care. And the clock was ticking. If this story is already making your blood boil, hit that subscribe button, because what happens next will leave you absolutely speechless. Justice is coming, and it's going to shake this hospital to its very foundation. What would you do if your child was denied emergency medical treatment? Would you stay calm, or would you burn the whole system down? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, because this father's response is something nobody saw coming. 45 minutes. That's how long Marcus and Janelle Chen sat in that emergency room bay, watching their daughter fight for every single breath. 45 minutes that felt like 45 hours. 45 minutes where every second mattered, and yet nothing was happening. Marcus checked his watch for what must have been the 100th time, his leg bouncing with anxiety, his eyes constantly moving between Zoe's face and the monitors beeping beside her bed. The oxygen mask fogged with each labored breath she took, and that blue tinge around her lips that had terrified Janelle in the car wasn't getting better. It was getting worse. Janelle couldn't sit still. As a pediatric surgeon, she'd spent years in hospitals, years understanding how these systems worked, years knowing the protocols and procedures. And that's exactly why the alarm bells in her head were getting louder with every passing minute. She watched the monitors like a hawk, her medical training screaming at her that her daughter's condition was deteriorating. Zoe's oxygen saturation kept dipping, hovering in the low 80s when it should be in the high 90s. Her respiratory rate was climbing, meaning her little body was working even harder to get air. This wasn't stable. This wasn't safe. This was a child who needed intensive care immediately. For the third time in 20 minutes, Janelle approached the nurse's station, her voice steady but urgent. "Excuse me, has the ICU coordinator responded yet? My daughter's oxygen levels are dropping." The nurse, a different one this time, barely looked up from her computer. "We're working on it, ma'am. The coordinator is reviewing the case." "Working on it?" Reviewing the case. Corporate hospitals speak for wait and pray. Janelle walked back to the bay, her hands trembling, her heart racing. She was a doctor, for God's sake. She knew what delayed treatment meant. She knew what happened when pneumonia turned into sepsis, when sepsis turned into organ failure, when minutes became the difference between recovery and tragedy. Marcus saw his wife's face and knew. He stood up, placing his hand on her shoulder. "They're stalling, aren't they?" Janelle nodded, unable to trust her voice. And then they both saw something that made their blood run cold. A family, a white couple with their teenage son who had a broken arm, who had been admitted to the emergency room 30 minutes after Zoe, were being wheeled toward the elevators. Going upstairs. Getting admitted. Marcus and Janelle locked eyes, and in that glance, an entire conversation happened. They both recognized the pattern. They both knew what this was. But they couldn't focus on anger right now. They had to focus on Zoe. 10 minutes later, another family was moved upstairs. Then another. Each time, Marcus felt his jaw tighten a little more. Each time, Janelle had to force herself to breathe, to stay calm, to not scream at every staff member walking past their bay. Their daughter was struggling to breathe, her oxygen levels dropping, her fever spiking, and somehow she wasn't a priority. The medical racism that plagued healthcare systems across America, the discrimination that Janelle had studied, had written papers about, had advocated against, was now happening to her own child. And the helplessness was suffocating. Then she appeared. Karen Westbrook, the ICU coordinator, walked into their bay like she owned the place, which, as they would later discover, her family essentially did. Mid-40s, wearing a sharp blazer that screamed authority, carrying a clipboard like it was a weapon. Her lips already pursed in disapproval before she'd even looked at Zoe's chart. She stood at the foot of the bed, flipping through pages with an expression that Marcus would later describe as contemptuous. Not concerned. Not urgent. Contemptuous. When Karen finally spoke, her tone made Janelle's skin crawl. It was slow, deliberate, condescending, the way you might speak to a child who'd asked a stupid question. "So, I'm looking at your daughter's case and I'm trying to understand why we're considering ICU admission." Janelle blinked, certain she'd misheard. "I'm sorry, what?" Karen glanced up, her eyes cold. "I'm questioning whether Zoe really needs ICU-level care. Her vitals have stabilized somewhat, and I'm thinking observation here in the emergency room might be sufficient." Stabilized somewhat. Janelle felt something snap inside her. Stabilized? Her oxygen saturation is 83%. She's tachypneic with a respiratory rate of 45. She has a fever of 104.8, and she's showing signs of early sepsis. "I'm a pediatric surgeon, I know what ICU-level care looks like and my daughter needs it. Now." The words came out sharp, professional, backed by years of medical expertise. But Karen didn't flinch. Instead, her eyes narrowed, and her voice took on an edge that was unmistakable. "Well, doctor, this isn't your hospital. Our ICU has limited beds and we need to prioritize critical cases. We have protocols, triage systems. I'm sure you understand." The implication hung in the air like poison. "Your daughter isn't critical enough." Marcus stepped forward, his voice controlled but his eyes blazing. "Our daughter is critical. You just heard her oxygen levels. Look at her. She can barely breathe." Karen glanced at Zoe and for a moment, something flickered across her face. But it wasn't compassion. It was calculation. "I'm also seeing some issues with your insurance verification," Karen said, tapping her clipboard. "Until we can confirm coverage for ICU-level care, which is extremely expensive, we need to be cautious about admission. I'm sure you understand our position." The room went silent except for the beeping of Zoe's monitors and her labored breathing through the oxygen mask. Janelle's voice, when it came, was barely above a whisper, but it shook with rage. "Are you seriously denying my daughter treatment because of insurance? That's illegal. You know that's illegal, right? EMTALA laws require you to stabilize emergency patients regardless of ability to pay." Karen's smile was thin and practiced. "We're not denying treatment. We're treating her right here in the emergency room. What I'm saying is that ICU admission requires verification, and until we have that, we need to explore other options." Other options. Code for making them someone else's problem. Marcus felt his wife's body trembling beside him, felt his own hands balling into fists. This woman, this administrator with her clipboard and her blazer and her complete lack of humanity, was playing games with their daughter's life. But it was about to get worse. Karen pulled out her phone and made a call, her voice professional and detached. "Robert, I need you in the ER. We have a situation." 15 minutes later, Robert Fisher arrived, the night administrator, A man in his late 50s wearing a gray suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. He carried himself with the air of someone who dealt with problems by making them disappear, and as he reviewed Zoe's chart, his expression remained clinically detached, as if he were reviewing a business proposal rather than a dying child's medical emergency. Chen Technologies, Robert said, reading from the insurance card. I'm not familiar with this company. Is this a small business? A startup? His tone suggested that small businesses and their insurance policies were somehow less legitimate, less trustworthy. Marcus's jaw tightened. It's a Fortune 500 company, but that shouldn't matter. We have insurance. Valid insurance. Our daughter needs ICU care. Robert nodded slowly, the kind of nod that meant he was listening but not really hearing. The issue, Mr. Chen, is verification. We need to confirm that your policy covers intensive care unit admission. Without that confirmation, if we admit your daughter and your insurance doesn't cover it, you could be looking at tens of thousands of dollars in out-of-pocket costs. We're trying to protect you from financial burden. The words sounded reasonable, almost compassionate, but the underlying message was crystal clear. We don't trust your insurance. We don't trust you. And we're not taking the risk. How long does insurance verification take? Marcus asked, his voice so tight it was barely recognizable. Robert glanced at his watch. Well, it's almost midnight. The insurance company offices are closed. We'd need to wait until morning when they open. Could be hours. Hours? Janelle made a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and a sob. She doesn't have hours. I'm a doctor. I'm standing here watching my daughter deteriorate, and you're telling me we need to wait for business hours? Robert's expression remained unchanged, his voice maddeningly calm. Ma'am, I understand you're upset, but we have protocols. We can't just admit every patient who comes through those doors without proper coverage verification. We have a responsibility to this hospital, to our other patients, to our financial sustainability. Financial sustainability. Those words echoed in the small emergency room bay. Financial sustainability was more important than a 4-year-old's ability to breathe. What are you suggesting? Marcus asked, though he already knew the answer and dreaded hearing it. Robert adjusted his glasses, his tone carefully neutral. We have a few options. We can keep her here in the ER under observation until morning when we can verify coverage. Or, if you're concerned about wait times, we can arrange a transfer to County General Hospital. They have different protocols for unverified insurance cases. County General. The underfunded, understaffed hospital 40 minutes away. The hospital where patients waited hours for basic care. The hospital that, if they were being honest, was where black families were often redirected when wealthier hospitals didn't want to deal with them. Janelle's voice cracked, tears streaming down her face now, all professional composure shattered. You want to transfer my dying daughter to another hospital because you can't verify insurance for a few hours? Do you hear yourself? Do you hear how insane that sounds? But Robert's expression didn't change. He'd had this conversation before. He'd made these calculations before. He knew exactly what he was doing and he didn't care. Marcus placed his hand on Janelle's shoulder, feeling her body shaking with sobs and rage. He leaned close to her ear and whispered, "Let me make a phone call." Janelle looked at him, confusion and desperation in her eyes, but she nodded. Marcus turned to Robert, his voice deadly calm. "Give me 10 minutes. Robert nodded, that same practiced professional nod. "Of course. Take your time. We'll keep your daughter comfortable in the ER. There's no rush." No rush. As if a child with 83% oxygen saturation and climbing fever wasn't an emergency. As if the color draining from Zoe's face wasn't urgent. As if medical racism and insurance discrimination weren't literally killing their daughter right in front of them. Marcus walked toward the exit, his phone already in his hand, his mind already calculating every move he was about to make. Because in that moment, Marcus Chen stopped being a worried father trying to work within the system. He became something else entirely. He became the system's worst nightmare. Behind him, Janelle collapsed into the chair beside Zoe's bed, holding her daughter's small hand, watching her baby fight for breath while a hospital with empty ICU beds and abundant resources played bureaucratic games with her life. Mr. Spots, the stuffed giraffe, sat on the tray table, a reminder of the birthday party that felt like a lifetime ago. A reminder of the joy that had been ripped away by a healthcare system that saw insurance policies before it saw humanity, that saw profit margins before it saw children, that saw everything except what mattered most. What happens next will restore your faith that justice still exists in this world. Hit that subscribe button because this father is about to remind an entire hospital why you never, ever mess with someone's child. Have you or someone you love ever been denied medical care because of insurance or discrimination? Share your story in the comments, because what's about to unfold proves that sometimes one person really can change an entire broken system. Outside Riverside General Hospital, under the harsh fluorescent lights of the parking lot, Marcus Chen became a man on a mission. His first call was to David Kim, his chief financial officer, a man who'd been with Chen Technologies since the beginning, who understood that when Marcus called at midnight, it wasn't a request, it was an emergency. The phone rang twice before David answered, his voice thick with sleep. Marcus? What's wrong? I need everything on Riverside General Hospital, Marcus said, his voice sharp and controlled, the voice of a CEO who'd built a billion-dollar company from nothing. Who owns it, who funds it, board members, financial statements, everything you can find. 10 minutes. There was a pause, the sound of David fumbling for his laptop, the clicking of keys. 10 minutes? Marcus, what's happening? But Marcus had already ended the call. There was no time for explanations. Every second his daughter spent in that emergency room was a second closer to tragedy. His second call was to Patricia Lawson, his head of legal, a brilliant attorney who'd fought off corporate raiders, navigated international trade disputes, and had never, not once, let Marcus down when he needed her. She answered on the first ring, already alert. Patricia didn't sleep much anyway. Marcus, talk to me. Her voice was all business, ready for whatever was coming. I need to know what legal authority I have right now. Not tomorrow morning. Not after you research and file briefs. No. Right this second. What power do I have to force a hospital to treat my daughter? Patricia's sharp intake of breath told him she understood the gravity immediately. Your daughter? What hospital? What happened? Marcus gave her the 30-second version, his words clipped and precise. Discrimination. Insurance denial. Deteriorating condition. Emergency treatment refused. Patricia's response was immediate, her legal mind already racing through statutes and precedents. EMTLA laws, Emergency Medical Treatment and Labor Act. They legally cannot deny emergency stabilization. I can have an injunction filed within the hour, federal judge on call, but Marcus, he cut her off. But that's time. I need something now. His third call was to someone he never expected to need at midnight. Richard Torres, CEO of Medicare Plus, the insurance provider that Chen Technologies had partnered with 5 years ago, a partnership that had been mutually beneficial and had made both companies incredibly successful. Richard's voice was groggy but concerned when he answered. Marcus? It's midnight, what's going on? Marcus's question was direct and devastating. Why is Riverside General Hospital saying they can't verify our coverage? Why are they claiming our platinum-level policy needs verification before they'll admit my 4-year-old daughter to the ICU? The silence on the other end lasted exactly 3 seconds, and then Richard's voice came back, no longer groggy, fully alert and furious. They said what? Marcus, your company has platinum-level coverage, the highest tier we offer. There's nothing to verify. Every hospital in the network has immediate access to that information. They're lying or they're incompetent or both. Give me 5 minutes. I'm calling them directly. Someone's about to have a very bad night. Marcus ended the call and stood there, phone in hand, watching through the glass doors of the emergency room entrance as Janelle sat beside their daughter's bed, holding Zoe's tiny hand, her shoulders shaking with sobs. For a moment, just a moment, Marcus Chen the CEO disappeared, and what remained was Marcus Chen the father, a man who would move heaven and earth, who would burn down every system, who would sacrifice everything to save his child. He paced the parking lot, his mind working through scenarios, through power dynamics, through every piece of leverage he had. Because that's what this had become. Not a medical emergency being handled by professionals. A power struggle. A game. And if they wanted to play games with his daughter's life, he was about to show them what real power looked like. His phone rang. David. 7 minutes, not 10. Marcus, I've got it. Riverside General is privately owned. Majority shareholder is something called Westbrook Medical Group. 60% ownership. Marcus stopped pacing. Westbrook? As in Karen Westbrook? David's voice carried a note of grim confirmation. Her father, Gerald Westbrook. He founded the group 30 years ago. Karen sits on the board of directors. Marcus, she's not just an ICU coordinator. She's part ownership. And there's more. The way David said those last words made Marcus's stomach drop. Tell me. David took a breath. I did a quick search of recent lawsuits and news articles. Marcus, there are 3 active lawsuits against Riverside General Hospital. All 3 alleging discriminatory treatment. Two of them specifically involved black families who were denied care or given substandard care. One case, a 7-year-old boy with a severe asthma attack was kept in the ER for 6 hours while they verified insurance, that turned out to be completely valid. By the time they admitted him, he'd suffered brain damage from oxygen deprivation. The family is suing for $8 million. Marcus felt something cold and sharp settle in his chest. This wasn't an isolated incident. This wasn't bureaucratic incompetence. This was a pattern. This was systematic racism baked into the very structure of this hospital, protected by wealth and ownership and the kind of privilege that let people like Karen Westbrook play God with other people's children. Send me everything. Every lawsuit, every complaint, every news article. Send it now. David's response was immediate. Already in your email. Marcus, whatever you're about to do, I'm behind you 100%. Before Marcus could respond, Patricia called back. Marcus, I've been digging. Riverside General receives federal funding through Medicare and Medicaid. That means they're bound by federal anti-discrimination laws. They cannot, under any circumstances, deny emergency treatment based on race, ethnicity, or insurance status. I can have an injunction, but you're right, that takes time. An hour at minimum. Marcus's voice was tight. What else? You said, but earlier. There's another option. Patricia's voice carried a hint of something that might have been admiration. I pulled the corporate records. Chen Technologies owns 40% of MedSupply Solutions, correct? Marcus nodded, though she couldn't see him. We're the largest shareholder, yes. Patricia continued, her tone taking on the edge of a legal predator. MedSupply has an exclusive contract with Riverside General. Every piece of medical equipment, every surgical supply, every pharmaceutical, everything runs through that contract. Without MedSupply, Riverside General would have to shut down operations within 72 hours. You have leverage, Marcus. Nuclear leverage. The pieces clicked into place in Marcus's mind like a puzzle solving itself. The power dynamics shifted. The game changed. He wasn't just a desperate father anymore. He was a man holding the keys to this hospital's entire operation. Patricia, I need you to draft termination papers for that contract. Effective immediately. Have them ready to send in 10 minutes. Patricia didn't hesitate. Consider it done. Marcus, this is going to have massive repercussions. Are you sure? Marcus looked through the glass doors again, saw his daughter's small form on that gurney, saw his wife's anguish. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. Inside the emergency room, Robert Fisher approached Janelle with his clipboard and his practiced professional demeanor. But something had changed in his expression. Something that might have been nervousness. Mrs. Chen, I just received a call from your insurance provider. Seems there was a miscommunication on our part. Your coverage has been verified. Full platinum level benefits. Janelle's head snapped up, hope flooding her face for the first time in hours. So you'll admit her to the ICU? Right now? Robert hesitated, and in that hesitation, Janelle's hope began to crack. Well, we're still assessing bed availability in the ICU. The coordinator needs to make the final determination on medical necessity. Karen Westbrook appeared as if summoned, her expression harder than before, her voice sharp. Robert, I think we should maintain our position. ICU beds are for critical patients and I've reviewed this case thoroughly. I'm not convinced. Robert turned to her, clearly uncomfortable. Karen, the insurance is verified. We have confirmation directly from Medicare Plus. Platinum level coverage. But Karen's eyes had taken on a stubborn, almost manic quality, the look of someone who'd made a decision and refused to back down regardless of facts or reason. Robert, I'm the ICU coordinator. I determine medical necessity, not insurance companies. And I'm not comfortable admitting this patient. There are protocols, standards of care, and frankly, I think observation in the ER is the appropriate level of treatment. Janelle stood up slowly, her voice rising with each word, years of professionalism crumbling under the weight of maternal desperation and rage. You're not comfortable? You're not comfortable? My daughter can't breathe. Her oxygen levels are in the 80s. She has a fever of 105. She's showing signs of sepsis. And you're not comfortable? The security guard standing near the nurse's station shifted uncomfortably, his hand moving to his radio, unsure whether he was about to witness a medical emergency or a physical confrontation. Other families in the ER waiting room had stopped their conversations, turning to watch the scene unfold. Nurses paused their work, stealing glances at the confrontation. The entire emergency room had gone quiet except for Janelle's voice, cracking with emotion, echoing off the sterile walls. I'm a pediatric surgeon. I spent 15 years treating children. I know what critical looks like. And if you let my daughter die in this ER because you're playing power games, I will spend the rest of my life making sure everyone knows what you did." Karen opened her mouth to respond, her face flushed with anger, but she never got the chance. The automatic doors slid open, and Marcus Chen walked back into the emergency room. His face was calm, almost eerily calm, but his eyes carried something that made Karen take an involuntary step backward. They were the eyes of a man who just made decisions that would change everything, who just moved pieces on a chessboard that others didn't even know they were playing on. He walked past Karen without acknowledging her, went straight to Janelle and pulled his wife into his arms. "It's going to be okay," he whispered into her hair, his voice carrying a certainty that hadn't been there before. "I promise you it's going to be okay." Janelle pulled back, searching his face, seeing something there that confused and comforted her simultaneously. "What did you do?" Marcus just smiled, a small, cold smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I made some phone calls. Now we wait." Karen watched this exchange, her instincts telling her that something had shifted, that the power dynamics in this room had somehow changed in the few minutes Marcus had been outside. Robert stood beside her, checking his phone, his expression growing more concerned by the second. The emergency room remained silent, everyone waiting, everyone sensing that something significant was about to happen. And in that silence, Zoe's monitors continued to beep, her oxygen levels continued to drop, and a 4-year-old girl continued to fight for her life while adults played games of power and prejudice around her. But those games were about to end. Because Marcus Chen had just moved the final piece into place and checkmate was coming. The question wasn't whether justice would be served. The question was how devastating that justice would be. If you think this father is about to unleash something incredible, you need to hit that subscribe button right now, because what happens in the next few minutes will have you cheering out loud. Has anyone in your family ever been discriminated against in a hospital or healthcare setting? Drop your experiences in the comments below, because this story proves that sometimes fighting back isn't just necessary, it's the only option. Marcus Chen walked back into that emergency room a different man than the one who'd left 10 minutes earlier. He moved with purpose, with certainty, with the kind of quiet power that comes from knowing exactly what cards you hold and exactly when to play them. He approached Robert Fisher, the night administrator who just told his wife that their dying daughter could wait until morning for insurance verification. Robert was still standing there with his clipboard, still wearing that practiced expression of bureaucratic concern, still completely unaware that the ground beneath his feet was about to disappear. "Mr. Fisher," Marcus said, his voice calm and measured, "I need you to call your hospital administrator. Right now." Robert blinked, clearly not expecting this approach. He'd dealt with angry parents before, desperate families making demands they had no power to enforce. This was just another Tuesday for him. "Sir, it's 11 p.m. I am the night administrator. I'm the person you speak with regarding—" Marcus cut him off, his tone unchanged, still perfectly calm. "Then call your CO. Jonathan Merrick. I need to speak with him immediately." The emergency room seemed to hold its breath. Robert's expression shifted from bureaucratic patience to something resembling confusion mixed with annoyance. "Mr. Chen, I understand you're frustrated, but Mr. Merrick doesn't take calls in the middle of the night for individual patient concerns. There's a chain of command, protocols we follow." Marcus reached into his wallet and pulled out a business card. Simple, elegant, expensive cardstock. He handed it to Robert. "Tell him Marcus Chen is calling. He'll answer." Robert took the card, glanced at it, and his entire demeanor changed in the span of a heartbeat. His eyes widened. His face went pale. His hand holding the card began to tremble slightly. "Chen Technologies." He looked up at Marcus, then back at the card, then at Marcus again. "Wait, the Chen Technologies? The software company? The Fortune 500 company?" Marcus didn't respond. He didn't need to. The card said everything. Karen Westbrook, who'd been standing nearby with her arms crossed, finally spoke up, her voice dripping with disdain. "I don't care if he's Bill Gates himself. Medical decisions aren't made by corporate executives. I'm the ICU coordinator, and I determine who gets admitted based on medical necessity, not on who someone knows or how much money." She never finished that sentence. Because at that exact moment, Marcus's phone rang. The ringtone cut through the tension like a knife. Marcus answered, and without hesitation he pressed the speaker button. His voice was warm, almost friendly, the voice of someone speaking to a colleague. "Jonathan. Thanks for calling back." The voice that came through the speaker was rushed, breathless. The voice of a man who'd been woken up with alarming news and had immediately understood the gravity of the situation. "Marcus, I just heard there's an issue with your daughter at Riverside General. What's happening? Are you okay? Is your family okay? The emergency room had gone completely silent. Every nurse, every doctor, every security guard, every patient within earshot had stopped what they were doing. Because that voice, that name, meant something. Jonathan Merrick wasn't just the CEO of Riverside General Hospital. He was one of the most powerful healthcare administrators in the state, a man whose decisions affected thousands of employees and tens of thousands of patients. And he was on the phone, on speaker, talking to Marcus Chen like they were old friends. Marcus's voice remained calm, but every word was chosen with surgical precision. Your ICU coordinator is refusing to admit my 4-year-old daughter to intensive care despite severe pneumonia and dropping oxygen saturation. Your night administrator suggested transferring her to county hospital because of insurance verification issues that have, as of 10 minutes ago, been completely resolved by our insurance provider directly. My daughter has been in your emergency room for over an hour, deteriorating, while your staff plays bureaucratic games with her life. The silence that followed was deafening. Through the phone speaker, they could hear Jonathan Merrick take a sharp breath, the sound of a man who'd just been hit with information that both horrified and infuriated him. When he spoke again, his voice had transformed from concerned friend to commanding executive. Put Robert Fisher on the phone. Now. Robert looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. His hand shook as Marcus held the phone out to him. He took it, turned off the speaker and pressed it to his ear. What followed was a conversation that Robert would remember for the rest of his career. Those watching couldn't hear Jonathan's words, but they could see Robert's face drain of color with each passing second. They could see him swallow hard, nod repeatedly, stammer apologies and explanations that were clearly being cut off. They could see sweat begin to form on his forehead despite the air-conditioned coolness of the emergency room. They could see a man realizing that he'd made a catastrophic error in judgment, that he'd denied treatment to the daughter of someone who had direct access to his boss, and that his career was currently hanging by a thread. Yes, sir. I understand. Yes, immediately. No, sir, I don't know why. Yes, sir. Right away. Robert handed the phone back to Marcus, his hand visibly trembling now, his face ashen. Marcus put the phone back on speaker, and Jonathan Merrick's voice filled the emergency room once again. Mr. Chen, I am deeply, profoundly sorry for what you and your family have experienced tonight. Your daughter will be admitted to the ICU immediately. I'm personally calling our chief of pediatrics to come in and oversee her care. Marcus's response was immediate and non-negotiable. No. I want Dr. Sarah Kim. I know she's on call tonight. I want her specifically. There was no hesitation from Jonathan. Of course. Whatever you need. Dr. Kim is excellent, one of our best. She'll be there within 15 minutes. I'm getting dressed now, I'll be there in 20 minutes personally. Karen Westbrook, who'd been standing frozen during this entire exchange, finally found her voice. Her face was flushed, her composure cracking. Jonathan, wait. This is a medical decision. I'm the ICU coordinator. I determine medical necessity based on clinical guidelines, not based on personal relationships or... The voice that came through the phone speaker was ice-cold, harder than steel, carrying the weight of absolute authority. Karen? Is that you, Karen Westbrook? She swallowed hard. Yes, Jonathan, I'm trying to explain that medical protocols require... Jonathan cut her off with a tone that made everyone in the emergency room flinch. You're suspended. Effective immediately. Pending a full investigation into tonight's incident and any other cases where you may have denied appropriate care. Leave the floor. Now. Karen's face went from flushed to bright red, her eyes wide with shock and fury. You can't suspend me for following hospital protocols. I have a right to make clinical decisions. My family owns 60% of this hospital, you can't just... Jonathan's voice came back even harder. I absolutely can, and I just did. Robert, have security escort Karen out of the building. If she resists, call the police. And Karen? Your father will be hearing from me first thing in the morning about tonight's decisions and the pattern of discrimination lawsuits this hospital is facing. This conversation is over. 2 security guards who'd been standing awkwardly nearby suddenly moved with purpose. They approached Karen, their expressions professional but firm. Ma'am, we need you to come with us. Karen looked around wildly as if searching for someone to support her, someone to validate her position. But every staff member avoided her eyes. Every nurse suddenly found something fascinating on their computer screens. Every doctor developed an urgent need to check on a patient. She was alone. This is ridiculous. This is an abuse of power. I was following protocols. You'll all be hearing from my lawyer. But the security guards were already escorting her toward the exit, her protests echoing off the walls as she was removed from the emergency room floor. The same emergency room where, just minutes before, she'd stood with her clipboard and her authority and her complete disregard for a dying child. The same floor where she'd played God with Zoe Chen's life. That power was gone now, stripped away in seconds by a single phone call, by the reality that some people have more power than others, and tonight she'd picked the wrong family to discriminate against. Marcus ended the call and immediately turned to Janelle, who'd been standing there in shock, watching this entire confrontation unfold like something out of a fever dream. He pulled her into his arms and she collapsed against him, sobs racking her body. Not sobs of despair anymore. Sobs of relief so intense it was almost painful. "They're taking her up now," Marcus whispered into her hair, his voice finally showing emotion, finally cracking with the weight of the last hour. "It's over. They're taking care of her now." Around them, the emergency room had transformed into organized chaos. Nurses who moments before had been giving vague answers about ICU availability were suddenly moving with urgent purpose. Dr. Patel reappeared, his expression serious and focused. "We're taking Zoe to ICU immediately. Dr. Kim is on her way. We're going to take excellent care of your daughter, I promise you." A respiratory therapist arrived with additional oxygen equipment. An ICU nurse came down with transfer paperwork already prepared. The machinery of the hospital that had been so frustratingly slow, so deliberately obstructive, was now running at full speed. Janelle pulled back from Marcus, her tear-stained face searching his. "What just happened? Who are you? Who was that on the phone?" Marcus smiled, a tired, sad smile. "Someone who's going to make sure this never happens to another family. Ever." He looked at his daughter, tiny Zoe with her butterfly clips and her princess dress, being carefully transferred to a proper ICU transport gurney, with medical professionals finally treating her with the urgency she'd needed all along. Robert Fisher stood off to the side, his clipboard hanging uselessly in his hand, watching his night go from routine to catastrophic. He'd have reports to file, explanations to give, possibly a resignation to write. He'd denied care to Marcus Chen's daughter. He'd chosen bureaucracy over humanity. And he'd just learned the most expensive lesson of his career. In healthcare, in life, power matters. Justice matters. And sometimes, just sometimes, the people you discriminate against have the power to hold you accountable. The gurney began moving toward the elevators, toward the ICU, toward the care that Zoe should have received an hour ago. Marcus and Janelle walked beside it, one on each side, their hands on their daughter, their presence a promise that they would never leave her, never stop fighting for her. And as they passed the nurse's station, as they moved through the emergency room that had been their nightmare for the past hour, every single staff member avoided their eyes. Because they all knew. They all understood. Tonight, discrimination had lost. Tonight, justice had won. Tonight, one father had reminded an entire hospital that every child deserves care, regardless of the color of their skin or the insurance card in their parents' wallet. If your heart is racing right now, if you're ready to see how this story ends, you need to hit that subscribe button because the final chapter is going to leave you speechless. What would you have done in Marcus's situation? Would you have stayed calm like he did, or would you have handled it differently? Let us know in the comments because this conversation about healthcare discrimination needs to keep going. The intensive care unit of Riverside General Hospital transformed into a symphony of urgent, purposeful action. ICU nurses who'd been told there were no available beds suddenly had a room prepared in minutes, their movements precise and coordinated like a well-rehearsed dance. Medical equipment rolled into place, monitors powered on with soft beeps, 4 poles positioned, emergency medications drawn up and ready. This was what healthcare was supposed to look like. This was what should have happened an hour ago. This was justice, but it had come at the cost of a 4-year-old fighting for her life while adults played power games. Dr. Sarah Kim burst through the ICU doors 7 minutes after Jonathan Merrick's phone call, still tying her hair back, her face set with professional determination but her eyes showing the urgency of someone who understood exactly what was at stake. She'd been briefed on the situation, knew about the delay, knew about the discrimination, and she was furious. But right now fury could wait. Right now, a child needed her expertise, and Dr. Kim was one of the best pediatric intensivists in the state. She went straight to Zoe's bedside, her hands already assessing, her mind already calculating treatment protocols. "Okay, sweetheart, I'm Dr. Kim and we're going to help you feel better," she said softly to Zoe, even though the little girl was barely conscious, even though her oxygen levels were dangerously low. Because children hear everything even when they seem far away, and Dr. Kim knew that a gentle voice mattered. She turned to the nurses. "Let's get her intubated. I want broad-spectrum antibiotics started immediately. Vancomycin and ceftriaxone. Get me a chest x-ray, complete blood count, comprehensive metabolic panel, and blood cultures ×2. And someone get respiratory therapy up here now. The room exploded into controlled chaos. Nurses moved with practiced efficiency. The respiratory therapist arrived within seconds, equipment ready. Marcus and Janelle stood back, giving the medical team room to work, but their hands found each other, fingers intertwining so tightly it almost hurt. They watched as a tube was carefully placed down their daughter's throat, as machines began breathing for her because her little body was too exhausted to do it alone anymore. They watched as 4 lines were inserted, as medications began flowing into her veins, as monitors displayed numbers that were still too low but finally moving in the right direction. Janelle's medical training allowed her to understand every procedure, every medication, every vital sign change. Which meant she understood exactly how close they'd come to losing their daughter. Her legs felt weak. Marcus's arm wrapped around her waist, holding her up, holding them both up. She's going to be okay, Dr. Kim said, looking directly at them with the kind of confidence that comes from years of saving children's lives. She's stable. We caught it in time. She's going to be okay. Those words, in time, hung in the air with unspoken weight. In time but barely. In time but only because Marcus had power, had connections, had the ability to make phone calls that changed everything. What about the families who didn't have those resources? What about the children who'd been denied care by Karen Westbrook and her discriminatory protocols? How many of them hadn't made it in time? Once Zoe was stable, once the machines were breathing for her and the antibiotics were fighting the infection ravaging her small body, once her oxygen levels had climbed back to safer numbers, Marcus and Janelle finally allowed themselves to stand by her bedside. They each took one of her tiny hands, careful of the 4 lines, careful of the tubes and wires, just needing to touch their daughter, to feel her warmth, to remind themselves she was still here. Janelle whispered, her voice hoarse from crying and shouting, "What did you do? How did you make this happen?" Marcus looked at his wife, this brilliant surgeon who'd spent her career fighting for children, who'd written papers on healthcare disparities, who'd advocated for equal treatment, and who'd just experienced the very discrimination she'd spent years trying to eliminate. "What I had to," he said simply. Because sometimes the system doesn't change through proper channels and policy discussions and committee meetings. Sometimes the system changes because someone with power decides to use that power for good. Sometimes justice requires leverage. A nurse carefully tucked Mr. Spots, the stuffed giraffe, beside Zoe on the bed. The toy that had fallen in the parking lot during their desperate rush into the emergency room, the beloved companion that had been to every birthday party and every bedtime story, was back where it belonged. Next to Zoe's small hand with its 4-line, next to the monitors showing her vital signs, Mr. Spots stood guard. A reminder of childhood and innocence in a room full of medical equipment and adult failures. Dawn broke over the city, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. In the ICU family room, a small, quiet space designed for difficult conversations and private grief, Marcus Chen sat across from Jonathan Merrick, CEO of Riverside General Hospital. Jonathan looked exhausted, like he'd aged 5 years in the past few hours. His expensive suit was rumpled, his tie loosened, his eyes carrying the weight of understanding that his hospital, his responsibility, had nearly killed a child through discrimination and bureaucratic cruelty. "Marcus, I can't apologize enough," Jonathan began, his voice heavy with genuine remorse. "We're conducting a full investigation. Every staff member involved will be interviewed. We're reviewing protocols, looking at..." Marcus held up his hand, stopping him mid-sentence. His voice was calm but carried an edge sharp enough to cut. "Investigation isn't enough, Jonathan. How many other families has this happened to? Families who don't have my resources, my connections, my ability to make phone calls that get answered? How many children have been denied care, have suffered, have died because of the Karen Westbrooks of your hospital?" Jonathan's face paled at the word "died," because they both knew it was possible. They both knew that in the lawsuits David had uncovered, in the pattern of discrimination that had been allowed to flourish at Riverside General, there were likely cases where delays in treatment had resulted in permanent harm or worse. "We're reviewing all recent admissions from the past 6 months, looking for any patterns." Marcus cut him off again. 6 months? Try a year. Try 3 years. I want full transparency, Jonathan. Every single denial from the past year at minimum. Every case where a patient was told to wait, told to go to county, told their insurance needed verification. I want an independent review board, not hospital employees covering for each other. I want outside experts examining every single case. Jonathan nodded, pulling out his phone to make notes, to start the process of what would become the most comprehensive internal investigation Riverside General had ever conducted. But Marcus wasn't finished. And I want a formal policy change. In writing. Public. I want a guarantee that no patient will ever be denied emergency treatment for any reason related to insurance status, race, ethnicity, or economic status. I want it posted on your website, in your emergency room, in every waiting area. I want every patient who walks through your doors to know their rights. You have my word, Marcus. I'll make it happen. Jonathan's voice was sincere, but Marcus had learned tonight that words weren't enough, that good intentions crumbled under the weight of systemic discrimination and institutional racism. He leaned forward, his eyes locked on Jonathan's. Your word isn't enough. I want it in writing, public, by end of this week. Press release. Policy changes. Training protocols. Timeline for implementation. Everything documented and transparent. Marcus paused, letting the weight of his next words settle into the room. Or I pull every contract Chen Technologies has with this hospital. Medical supplies, IT infrastructure, research partnerships, the digital health platform we've been developing together. All of it. Gone. And I'll make sure every other hospital network in the state knows exactly why those contracts were terminated. The silence that followed was absolute. Jonathan understood what was being offered. Not a threat exactly. A choice. Change or face consequences that would cripple Riverside General's operations and destroy its reputation beyond repair. Jonathan Merrick, CEO of one of the largest hospital networks in the state, nodded slowly. You'll have it. Everything you've asked for. By Friday. In writing. Public. He extended his hand across the table. Marcus looked at it for a long moment, then shook it. Not because he trusted Jonathan's word alone, but because he just ensured that word would be backed by consequences, by accountability, by the kind of systemic change that actually protects vulnerable families. 3 days later, the ICU room had transformed from a scene of medical crisis to something resembling hope. Zoe was awake, the breathing tube removed, her oxygen levels stable without mechanical support. She was eating popsicles, her favorite cherry flavor turning her tongue bright red, making her giggle weakly when Marcus pretended to steal a bite. Her butterfly clips were back in her braids, arranged carefully by a nurse who'd taken time to make a little girl feel beautiful even in a hospital bed. Mr. Spots sat propped against the pillows, keeping watch as always. Marcus sat in the chair beside her bed, a picture book open in his lap, reading about a brave princess who saved her kingdom. Janelle was asleep in the recliner chair on the other side, finally allowing herself to rest after 3 days of barely sleeping, of watching every monitor, of using her medical knowledge to ensure her daughter received perfect care. The muted television on the wall showed the local news, and Marcus glanced up just as a headline scrolled across the bottom of the screen. Riverside General Hospital announces sweeping policy changes following discrimination allegations. The news anchor's face was serious as she detailed the story, how a prominent tech CEO's daughter had been denied ICU care, how that CEO had fought back, how a pattern of discrimination had been exposed. The screen showed footage of Jonathan Merrick at a press conference, announcing immediate policy changes, independent investigations, staff training on implicit bias and healthcare equity. It showed the formal public policy now posted in the emergency room, guaranteeing equal treatment for all patients regardless of race or insurance status. Marcus's phone buzzed on the bedside table. A text from Patricia, his head of legal. Karen Westbrook resigned this morning. 2 board members stepping down. Department of Justice opened a civil rights investigation into Riverside General. You did it. Marcus read the message twice, then turned off his phone. Justice, real justice, wasn't about revenge or satisfaction. It was about ensuring this never happened again. It was about the families who would come after them, who would walk into that emergency room and receive the care they deserved because one father had refused to accept discrimination. He set his phone aside and kissed Zoe's forehead, breathing in the scent of hospital soap and cherry popsicles and his daughter's life, precious and protected. She looked up at him with those big brown eyes, tired but recovering, and asked the question she'd been asking every day. Daddy, can we go home soon? Marcus smiled, a real smile this time, full of love and relief and hope. Soon, baby girl. Very soon. He stood and walked to the window, Zoe's small hand still holding his finger, refusing to let go even as he moved. The sun was rising over the city, painting everything in golden light, promising a new day. Below, he could see the emergency room entrance where they'd run in carrying their dying daughter 4 nights ago. where they'd faced discrimination and bureaucratic cruelty, where they'd fought back and won. Not just for Zoe but for every family that would come after them. Behind him, Janelle stirred in her sleep, murmuring something about Zoe's vital signs. Zoe giggled at her mother's sleep-talking, then yawned, her body still healing, still recovering from how close she'd come to tragedy. But she was alive. She was safe. She was going home soon. And the system that had failed her, that had failed so many others, was finally being forced to change. Marcus Chen stood at that window, holding his daughter's hand, watching the sunrise, and understood that sometimes power isn't about wealth or connections or the ability to make phone calls that get answered. Sometimes power is about using whatever resources you have to protect the vulnerable, to demand justice, to ensure that the next family, the next child, the next desperate parent won't face what you faced. Sometimes power is about making sure that when you walk through fire, you come out the other side not just with your loved ones safe, but with the fire itself extinguished so no one else has to burn. The screen faded to black, but the message remained crystal clear. Healthcare is a human right. Discrimination is unacceptable. And sometimes, just sometimes, justice wins. If this story moved you, if you believe that every child deserves equal care regardless of race or economic status, hit that subscribe button right now because stories like this need to be told, need to be shared, need to remind us all that change is possible when we refuse to accept injustice. Has this story changed how you think about healthcare discrimination? What would you do to make sure every hospital treats every patient equally? Share your thoughts and ideas in the comments below because this conversation is just beginning, and your voice matters in creating a more just healthcare system for all our children.